Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Run to the nearest phone booth and gear up. It's time for a super stroll down memory lane with a follow-up story that Doughboy420 heat beamed together for our discombobulating pleasure. Not All Heroes Wear Capes, Chapter 5. Let Eternal Sleepers Lie.
I woke up to find myself in a girl's room. Posters of anime-styled cats and characters from different Japanese animes lined the walls. There was a picture of some unknown family on the bedside nightstand. A Caucasian father with an African-American mother and their young child between them. My head rested upon a pink, heart-shaped pillow, and my shirt was off. My wounds tended to and wrapped, and an oven mitt over my death hand. I lay there wondering just what in the world happened last night, because my head was in a haze. But then, as a pounding headache came crashing into my brain, so did all the horrible images of the night before, and the tears began to well up in my eyes. But then, this was replaced by a sudden sense of fear. Whoever brought me here now knew who I was. But it didn't matter. So did the enemies I was up against, and the ones I was trying to protect by keeping my identity a secret were now no longer safe. So it didn't matter. All that mattered was that I had to get my little girl back. I was still sore as hell, but I figured I was alright enough to continue. So, with a bit of a pained grumble, I threw my legs over the side of the bed and sat up. It kind of hurt to breathe, but I knew I could manage. "What do you think you're doing?" asked a familiar girl's voice. I turned to find some girl I didn't recognize standing in the doorway, leaned up against the frame. She had tanned skin and pretty hazel-colored eyes, and her black hair fell over her shoulder. She was clad in a white shirt that led down to blue jeans. Where am I? What happened?" I asked. "You blacked out, dude. I brought you here." The younger, 20-something woman replied. "Who are you? Where exactly is here?" I asked her, motioning to the room around us. "Well, you were in rough shape, so I brought you home and fixed you up. And, well, I figured that since I knew your secret identity, it was only fair that you knew mine too." She replied to me. "Wait, you're Eidolon?" I asked. "In the flesh," she said with a snap, which was followed by a rattling sound of a metal spoon in a mug near to my head. I turned and was startled to find a humanoid hand made of solid shadow jutting out of the darkness beneath a nearby desk, a hand that held a steaming glass mug. "Coffee?" the girl said with a smile. We spent the next few moments explaining how everything started for us. Me, terrified as hell, waking up with the fear of some weird, rapid form of gangrene, or that maybe I'd been infected with some kind of disease. I was infected, but it wasn't any kind of disease. It was something much different. With her, she lost her family. She woke up alone in a void of black. She walked around for hours, calling, screaming, crying for help, but there was nothing. Only her voice in the darkness. A darkness that swallowed up her voice after it left her mouth. There was no reply, not even from an echo of her own voice. There was no echo, no matter how loud she screamed. She was alone. And then suddenly, she wasn't. Suddenly, she was back in the car with her parents, who were driving her to attend college for the first time. But they were gone, swallowed up by the same constricting darkness that had taken her, and it had strangled them, cut circulation off to their limbs, coiled around them like a snake made of shadow that coiled so tightly that it cut through their skin. They were lifeless, and the darkness within the car had nearly decapitated them and cut off their arms and legs from such extreme force. But just as suddenly as it happened, it was over, and the darkness slipped back into the shadows of the crashed car that now sat in the trees off the side of a small cliff on the edge of the road. Her parents were dead, and she felt responsible. So, once she realized what she was now capable of, she swore to use her newfound ability to make her parents proud and stop all the worst people in the city. We both had lost people because of these abilities, because of this curse that festered within us. The curse did come with some perks, though, like it always tried to keep its host alive. The last freak we took on could heal nearly as fast as his wounds could form, but each of us had this gift to some degree, so I knew I would be healed up well enough to move within a few hours. But I couldn't do anything until then. I was pretty messed up and in no shape to help anyone. I felt helpless. I couldn't do anything to save my little girl at the moment. I had to wait, letting the fear and anger swarm in my heart as I waited to heal. My flesh reforming on the outside as my soul was devoured on the inside. The time eventually came for me to save my daughter and exact my revenge. I was still fairly sore from the previous battle, but I was surely well enough to continue. Eidolon suited up in her gear of violet and black before she stopped me from donning my old sweater and bloody bandana. "Wait," she said. "I have something for you," she added before trotting off into the next room. She came running back with some clothing in hand. "In case you couldn't tell by the outfit, I'm a bit of a seamstress. And you were out for a while, so I made you something," she said excitedly, before handing me what she made. It was a black leather jacket with a gray hoodie sewn into its lining, and over the heart pocket of the jacket was a patch of what looked like a golden halo, circling around before slowly changing in shade to a black hand that gripped the tail of the halo to complete the circle, very similar to the shape of the Ouroboros serpent eating its own tail. No doubt a symbol she had made for me, and not only that, a new mask was sewn into the hood of the coat. It was just like my white bandana, and the bloody cross was dyed into it in exactly the same pattern as the original. It could easily be tucked down into the jacket and tied tighter to fit me better. But I didn't have to worry about anyone ripping it off of me. It was now permanently attached. I wasn't sure about it at first, because I wore my original gear because it was easy to hide beneath my everyday clothes. But I was soon won over by the plating that she had sewn into the jacket's lining. It wasn't bulletproof, but I could definitely take a lot more damage now, and I no longer had to deal with the irony smell of my own blood in my bandana. So that was a huge bonus. "Wow, Thanks, I said, running my thumb over the Ouroboros-like patch of the God's Hand halo on the breast of the jacket. No problem. I figured you better look the part if we're going to be the shadow puppets, she joked, giving me a laugh. Let's get going, I said, donning my new gear. Let's kick some butt, the girl said excitedly, before blinking away into the shadows. Wait, I still don't know exactly where here is, I said, to no one, because she was already long gone, on her way to the, in layman's terms, building. I was able to find my way with a little bit of trial and error. I had to be somewhere within a 5-mile radius of the building after all. I eventually caught up with Eidolon on the road outside of in layman's terms. You gotta stop that. Could you, give me a lift or something? I said, kind of out of breath from the 4-mile trek to get there. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I guess I just get excited sometimes. My bad, she said with a shrug. Yeah, I said. So, what's the plan? I asked. We came up with a plan for her to slip by in the shadows, and then once she was beyond security, she could lift me in through the window. The plan was pretty much perfect with her powers, but there were a few major flaws we didn't account for. There wasn't a single shadow to be found in the lobby. The place was lit up like the 4th of July, and it was nearly completely white, like a sterile environment you would see on sci-fi TV shows. So, we made a plan B. I would distract them so that Eidolon could slip by and then lift me up from some shadows that she could hopefully find somewhere inside. I tucked my new mask down and slid my hood off so that I wouldn't look like a criminal. Then I walked through the door and approached the reception desk. Hey, there's this weird guy outside and he looks kind of shady. You might want to go check it out, I said, making up a lie on the spot, trying to get the security guard at the front desk to go with me. Mr. Lehman Brown is expecting you, sir. Take the elevator up to the 20th floor. The female desk clerk spoke with a smile. What? I said, completely confused. Take the elevator up to the 20th floor. Mr. Lehman Brown is waiting for you. The clerk spoke again, before returning to her duties. So much for the element of surprise. I turned and walked to the elevator at the end of the hall, off the side of the lobby to go up. Eidolon was standing by the elevator, completely out of her element, waiting for me. I thought we had a plan, she said in confusion. They knew who I was. They knew we were coming, I said with a grumble. Oh boy, this is going to be fun, Eidolon replied with a hint of sarcasm. The elevator arrived and we stepped inside to make one long trip up to the 20th floor. The two of us rode the elevator on up, nervously waiting on what we were to find at the top of the elevator ride. With 22 floors, we were going near to the top of the building, and we had pretty much no means of escape if things were to go south. Eventually, we heard the ding of the elevator arriving at the 20th floor, where the doors slid open to another brightly lit room. Eidolon's powers would be virtually useless here. The room was huge and in kind of a circular shape with a balcony all around it that made up both the 20th and the 21st floors. Several built-in desks lined the circular room on both floors, all of them pointing toward a podium at the center. It was like an auditorium where everyone could hear the person in the center speak. It was some kind of big meeting room for the company. But tonight, it would be the stage for something much more destructive. Although it already looked like it had been a stage for something destructive, because bloody and decaying corpses littered both floors of the meeting room. Some of them fresh, some of them rotten and grayed. They were on the floor, on the desks, over the railing of the balcony. They were everywhere. And it wasn't until I got closer to one of them that I realized these weren't just any unfortunate victims. They were my unfortunate victims. I could recognize many of the thugs that I had dispatched with my own hand over the entire time I had this ability. Some of them were easily recognizable, while others were just decayed shells or damaged beyond recognition. I was sure that everyone that I had killed was there. Everyone that was still in mostly one piece anyway. The nightmare girl that I had faced at the start of all this sat lifeless in a chair. My friend Walter was on the floor beside me, and even my wife was there, draped over the desk in the center of the room. Only her body remained. Her face was completely gone, torn off by the monster I had just fought hours before. I felt like my heart jumped out of my chest and got stuck in my throat, nearly choking me with pain at the sight of her like that, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. I watched as my wife's faceless body sat up, her head tilted to the side, her arms then lifted oddly and unnaturally away from her body and stuck up into the air, where her lower half was kind of dragged off the table by her upper half. Her feet thumped onto the floor with a loud thud, as she just sort of hung there by her arms, held up by some invisible force, and then her feet began to swing forward one at a time, as if she was walking. But she wasn't walking. Her body was completely lifeless, but she was being manipulated as if she were some kind of puppet. Her arms and legs swung unnaturally forward toward Eidolon and I, and she seemed to sway like a marionette on unseen strings. Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched my wife's lifeless corpse used as a weapon against me. Then, the others followed suit. Zombie-like corpses of my victims all began to rise up, swaying like puppets, all of them coming to seek their revenge. Corpses with bits of them falling away as they approached me. Others covered in blood that was left in a trail at their feet, coagulated and full of dried or gloopy, bloody clumps. The smell of death and decay filled the air as the undead approached their food. I attempted to react by pushing one away, but my hands went right through their rotten torso, allowing what looked like embalming fluid to leak out onto my arms. I quickly withdrew from the viscous fluid within the zombie's midsection and removed my glove to deliver a touch to the face of another. But he just kept coming. They were already dead. My hand had already done its job and was useless against them now. I withdrew in fear and began to think that maybe all was lost. But then I was snapped out of my terror-induced trance when I heard the shattering of glass overhead. Eidolon had pulled a slingshot out of one of her pouches and had shot one of the lights with a rock before retrieving another one and shot it into another light. The room wasn't dark. It was still very much lit up, but with the lights on one side of the room taken out, there was enough shadow being cast by each body and item within the room for Eidolon to do her magic. Massive, tentacle-like arms of shadow emerged from the darkness to sweep across the army of the undead, knocking many of them off their feet, or even knocking their feet off of them. The force of the sweeping arms was so great that it tore through some of them, leaving their decayed feet cut off at the ankles. It was disgusting, but impressive. While Eidolon took care of the many attackers, there were a few in particular that advanced toward me, with more fervor than others. A gray-skinned, blonde-haired girl came at me. I didn't recognize her at first, but then it clicked in my head who she was. It was the Nightmare Girl, the one that had torn out her own wrists. Her wrists were now sewn back together. A mortician having done his work, but her body was already at the beginning stages of decay. It hurt me to kill her the first time around, but I had grown more hardened the more I killed, and I knew the second time around would be easier than the first. That is, easier emotionally, but physically, not so much. Taking down an undead killing machine is something else entirely. Quickly, I lunged at the girl, wrapping my hands around the base of her skull and ripping upwards, tearing the head from her body, removing the head or destroying the brain, just like in the movies. The girl's body dropped to the ground as I tossed her head down with it. She was followed directly behind by another familiar face, or what was left of one. The body of Charles dangled before me. The old man turned machine. Though now, he was more like a skin sack with no real bone structure beneath, everything inside of him having been turned to machine. He was now nothing more than a basic torso of a man, his arms and legs gone, and his skin a hollow shell. He lunged at me, teeth gnawing and mashing at the air, attempting to bite me. I was able to grab him about what was left of his waist in order to swing him about like an empty skin bag, slamming his skullless noggin on the pavement and liquefying the brain inside. Luckily, I wasn't attacked by the other two monsters I had dealt with, probably because there wasn't much left of them to become an undead monster. There was barely enough of the old man Charles left to cause any kind of threat. But there were several others. Gang members, racist skinheads, assholes that beat their wives. I took care of a lot of people, and now they were coming back full swing to take care of me. I ripped off limbs, punched through rotten corpses, beheaded them, battling my way through to end their lives a second time. I remember thinking in the moment that I should have felt something. I should have had some kind of emotion while killing all these people for a second time. But I didn't. Even when my vagrant friend came back to attempt to end me, I still felt nothing. I was only focused on reaching my daughter, and if I had to fight through the entire world, I was ready to do it. Eidolon and I had been dispatching the undead horde for several minutes when I finally noticed something off to the side of the room. A glint of light in the shadows. Then, as I watched, still avoiding attacks from rotting arms and gnashing teeth, a form slowly came into view. A tall woman with an hourglass figure, her body packed tightly into a skin-tight black and gray one-piece suit. It appeared to be some kind of leather that fit snugly against her body. She had silver-colored hair that fell down to her shoulders, and her pale, blue eyes were covered by a pair of oval-rimmed glasses, which were the source of the glinting in the shadows. Her complexion was so white that her skin almost put off a glow. Her hands danced around the air as if plucking and manipulating invisible strings. Strings that no doubt were connected somehow to the horde of zombies that Eidolon and I were facing off against. This woman was surely the puppeteer behind the small army before us. "Eidolon!" I yelled out to gain her attention before pointing out the woman at the edge of the room. Eidolon quickly sent a mass of solid darkness in the woman's direction, but it was stopped when a body came to block its path. This corpse was soon joined by another, and then another, all of them forming a massive wall to intercept us. But soon, that wall began to melt upon itself. The bodies mashed and fused together into a single massive lump of rotting flesh with arms, legs, and faces all strewn about an amorphous body of oozing, congealed flesh. This legion of death then attacked us all together, arms ripping and tearing, feet kicking and stomping, mouths biting, heads flailing. The mass of flesh moved over us like a tidal wave of decay, and it took everything we had to fight through it. Eidolon's shadow ripped through the beast, and I punched and tore through what I could. We were both covered in a mixture of fresh and coagulated blood, ranging from red to black in color, along with nearly every other manner of bodily fluid, on top of embalming chemicals that spilled out of the mass. Eventually, there was an opening and Eidolon took it. A massive hand shot through the corpse legion to deliver a blow to the puppeteer, knocking her off her feet and sending her stumbling to my direction as I pushed through the other side of the wave of flesh. I reached out with my darkened hand and made connection with her face. Her eyes immediately widened as my hand gripped around her cheeks. The woman twitched for a moment before the undead horde then turned and advanced upon us. I quickly moved out of the way as I watched the mass of flesh twisting and writhing around her body, tearing her to shreds beneath it, before the mass finally began to fall apart, bodies spasming and collapsing in upon themselves, and the mass before finally the entire legion ceased to function, and everything dropped with a disgusting plop on the floor of the meeting room. The two of us stood there, covered in all manner of viscous fluids, breathing heavily. Sorry about the new suit, I said to Eidolon. The white suit she made me, now stained black and red with blood and guts. She giggled a bit before we were interrupted by the sound of clapping from up on one of the balconies. A slow clap from a single individual who stepped forward into the light. It was him, Mr. Lehman Brown, the handyman. "Bravo, bravo," he spoke. "You've done so very well. You've taken out some of my best people. I really am quite impressed. I didn't expect it to go down like this, but you two, wow, I gotta hand it to you," he said, holding out a metal hand to us and smirking with a pun. "Where's my daughter?" I yelled to the large man in the cream-colored suit. "Meet me upstairs. I'll be waiting," he said, before turning and disappearing into a room beyond our vision. Eidolon and I looked at each other and moved to advance further. There was no turning back. We had to stop him, and I had to save my daughter.
Well, that leaves us with one last installment and quite the cliffhanger to hold on to, but you won't have to keep up your super strength of a patient mind much longer. Stop in next weekend for the epic conclusion you've all been waiting for, and until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.